last set of architectural systems to document is the floor types, and these are by far the simplest. They're actually very similar to ceilings, except we're working on a floor. First thing first, we need to make sure that some of the visibility graphics are correct. So I'm here in a working view, and I'm just going to change my working view. Keep in mind that on your sheet views, you're going to have sheet views with different visibility graphics with separate views to set up on separate sheets for the floors and for the walls. And then obviously the ceiling plans are separate as well. I would suggest that every step of every exercise, all of your sheet views are separate and have their own visibility graphics. So now just in a working view, I want to turn off the pattern on my walls. So I'm going to go down to the walls, and you can see where I have the cut pattern, I have that coarse fill. I'm just going to turn off the visibility here. So now these are not going to be distracting, but I'm still on a coarse level, which I don't want to change at the scale. Going back to VG for floors, one thing that could drive you crazy is the patterns might be turned on as hidden here as well. So make sure both foreground and background patterns are visible, which will allow you to show a pattern, different type of flooring pattern, and a different type of background color. So we already have the floor here. We have our structural slab, which is sometimes difficult to select. So I'm going to start with the structural slab and show the extent of it. So now I'm filtering that out and just selecting the floor. So keep in mind that your structural slab does not go through the shaft. So your stairs and the shaft openings like elevators, as you see here, will not have that default concrete. So if you're putting a pattern in order to differentiate your overall floor, so you're using that concrete throughout, concrete on mellow deck, make sure, and this is pretty standard thickness, make sure that you don't have it showing up in any of the shafts. So cut the floor wherever you have a stair, elevator, or some type of a shaft. Now what I'm going to do here, I do want a concrete pattern. So here I have the structure of the concrete, and what I want to do, it has a cut pattern, but I'm going to just give it a background. So background patterns have to be drafting. Foreground patterns, like we used on the ceiling, can be model as well. And if you want to see more descriptions about how to create a pattern and really how to create a filled region custom pattern and things like that, watch the ceiling type video, because that covers it. But what I want to do here is I want to add concrete to my surface. And I don't want that background pattern to show up on all of the views. I only want to show it in the views where I'm defining my flooring types. So now we can see all of the places with concrete and all the places where we don't have concrete. Everything else we're building on top of it. So we're going to create layers of flooring where we have things like carpeting or wood floor or anything special like that. So let's create our first floor. Going to edit type, and I'm going to create my, let's call it carpet tile. And in the structure, I'm just going to get rid of my deck. Now I have to have something between the core boundaries, but I'm just going to turn that into finish. And flooring, we usually show it really thin at about 1/4 of an inch. You could do the pad and the flooring on top of it, but carpet tile is generally one layer. So I'm going to start with my default floor and duplicate it and call this carpet tile, just the default one. Now for rendering and the appearance, I would create the exact type of flooring that I picked, and I would upload a picture of the carpet tile so it shows up in the rendering. Now here we're not trying to accomplish a rendering, and we might have not even selected exact carpet, but we want to define where the carpet tile goes. Remember, this is the preliminary project description, and a lot of this gets used for generalized decision about how the room is going to function, so the pattern less affects it than the type of flooring, and we're also talking about pricing. Okay, so I have carpet tile, so I might want to add a pattern of the carpet tile. So that pattern would be model, and carpet tile is a 2x2 or a 3x3 is the standard size. So I'm looking for a 2-foot by 2-foot pattern. And then I know I have a 2x2 ceiling, so I can probably just use my 2x2 ceiling. There we go. And remember, you can always create these patterns yourself, but I also want to add a background pattern as a drafting so it doesn't look like tile, so it has an additional pattern to it. And cross is actually a popular pattern for carpet. Let's see what that is going to look like. Okay, so I have my structure defined, and now I actually need to draw the carpet. So oftentimes carpet is going to be within the room. You can sometimes get a special effect by actually running it slightly outside for the circulation area. So let's show what that might look like. So we could actually have a carpet that covers a little bit of circulation area, so as you're approaching the room you have some of it on the outside, and it looks like about 5 feet from the wall, so 4 feet to 5 feet, good for a circulation pattern. Okay, and the final step, in order for the pattern to show, make sure you're offsetting it from level. So floors tend to go downward, or at the minimum it's going to be embedded at the same level where your slab is. So in order to see it, you're going to need to pull it out to that 1/4 of an inch, and we don't want it to be room bounding, and it's not structural. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. So now you can see your 2x2 pattern, and you can actually think about how you're finishing it off so you don't have those little edges. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to edit my boundary to account for that. Okay, so now I don't have that much of an edge. And the walls, any of the mall items should be sitting on top of it. If you have an issue with a pattern going through your furniture elements, and at this point in time you're probably turning off furniture for the flooring view, especially at the scales you're working in. But if the pattern is elevated, it might cover your Revit elements, which means that the three-dimensional part of the object is not showing up in plan view. Now, if you're wondering how to deal with that, going back to the color schemes, we covered the background and foreground color schemes and how to make sure that in the background color schemes your furniture pops out. So that was explained, and you can go back to that video and check it out. And then going on, now we have a concrete, we have a carpet tile. So what I would be calling out here is if I have another special flooring pattern. So I would not call it carpet 1, carpet 2, carpet 3. If I have broadloom carpet, if I have a wood floor or something like that, I would call it out especially. So let's do one more floor type. Okay, so I'm starting with my carpet tile and duplicating it, and now I'm going to have wood floor. And again, going into the structure. Now wood floor would be a little bit thicker, so I would have to think about transitions as well. And I'm going to duplicate carpet, if you're going for a rendering look, you might start with an actual wood finish. And I don't want the background pattern, because wood is probably going to have, let's see if I have something. Okay, wood board and wood board wide. Let's do a wide pattern. And again, make sure it's offset from the floor by the thickness. And now I'm going to set in my wood floor in this very nice conference room. So it's still, with the wide, it's still a pretty large pattern. And I can continue going and doing custom patterns. Now, a large, thicker material, so a material with larger thickness, you probably want to break it at a threshold, like here, where thinner materials like this can be just overlapped and with the transition strip down directly to the concrete, so you don't necessarily have to insert them in a room. But again, when you have half-inch or especially anything higher than that, keep in mind that you'll need to transition it with some kind of a slope, and that will require the transition space. So having a wall around it allows you to only transition at the door. So this is just a basic way how we could show some of the different flooring types through the color and pattern. Now what you might notice after laying out all of the different flooring types here by using the actual Malo pattern in this scale, and especially if you're on a project that has 16-inch scale, you will note that it's really hard to read. Now one thing we will do right away is turn off your furniture and furniture systems, which will help a little bit, but showing the actual pattern, except perhaps for the slab itself, does get really busy, and especially when you're combining the pattern, two of the different patterns, the Malo pattern and the color pattern. So it is a good idea to show the Malo pattern unless it's too small. So in this case with the wood, where it's really small, probably wouldn't show it at all. Here I might show the 2x2, which we don't necessarily always show on a carpet tile, but it differentiates it from broadloom. But the background pattern does get to be a little bit much. So what I would suggest is, instead of what we've been doing here, to go back and adjust these to make sure that they're shown with a color or a color and pattern combo. So we'll try one of each. We'll do color and pattern combo for the carpet, and then we're just going to assign color for the wood floor, and the concrete we're just going to leave it as pattern, since that's one thing that's not generally too difficult. Okay, so let's start with the concrete floor. So we also want to duplicate this and call it floor, actually just type 1. And otherwise we're going to leave it as is. I'm going to do here carpet tile. Here I'm just going to rename it. So that's type 2 is our carpet tile. Broadloom carpet would be a separate type, but just different style of carpet tile would not be a separate type. So we're going to go here, and instead of using that background pattern, in order to apply color, I'm going to use solid and then assign it a color. So now without a pattern, it's easier to see. What I'm going to do with wood, I'm going to again rename it. And here I'm going to get rid of the mallow pattern and just give it the background pattern. You might have several more flooring types. You might be using resilient floors. You might be using stone or a tile floor, depending on your spaces. So make sure you define all of them and use color wherever possible because of your scale, and pattern only should be shown if it's large enough pattern to work with your scaling. Now later on, as you're showing enlargements, you might be wanting to show the floor pattern. Now how we show flooring is not very defined. It really is going to vary depending where you're going to be working, so each office has its own standard. But the crucial point with any drawing should be it should be legible. So the scale of your drawing might dictate how you decide to show a different finish, whether you're using a pattern or these days color printing is getting much more affordable and accessible, and a lot of times we're just showing things digitally anyway, so using color on architectural drawings of all the different types is becoming more common. And of course, coordinate your color scheme so it could go with the color of the actual material, or it could follow perhaps the patterns that you used on your original color schemes for the area plans. And now for the final step of the flooring systems, which I said floors are going to be the easiest one, and they cover a lot of similar ground as we were covering with previously with the ceilings. We need to create a legend. So as always, make sure that the scale of your legend matches the scale of your drawing because of any patterns that you might be showing. And then once again, you're going to be using a filled region. And for consistency, it might be nice to have the same size as we had for the ceilings to make it look very consistent. So we had 6 by 4. And the type 1, floor type 1. Now, as previously, we're going to have to create some custom types. So first we have concrete slab. Again, call it by what it is, not by the flooring type. And there is more than one concrete pattern, so let's just make sure we're being consistent about what is being used on here and what's going to be used on the actual floor plan. And now we can duplicate. So right now I'm only showing the 3 types. The third type is just going to be color. So we're gonna edit type again. And this is gonna be our wood floor. So it doesn't actually have a pattern. Let's call it a fill. And it's going to be solid. And I think I made it something like this. Brownish orange. Now the floor type 2 is compound. So this is going to be carpet tile fill. And in the foreground, it's going to have our mallow pattern. So we did 2 by 2. Use the ceiling 24 inch by 24 inch. And in the background, we had a solid fill. And as always, if you're showing a pattern, make sure it's clearly visible and preferably centered. Again, by using tab to select the individual line and to center it within the pattern. And make sure that all of the little patterns are the same size. So for floors, as for ceilings, because we cannot show the surface, we can only show them in section, we are using a filled region to represent them in the floor type legend. And this is the last step of your floor types.